Welcome into another edition of the BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast. College football playoff edition. We'll call it number 2, and a happy Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Hopefully your holidays went smooth, safe. Andrew Clista, Mike Gross, Frank Bodani here. Gentlemen, post SMU game, it's after Christmas. Everything has had time to settle. What did this victory for Penn State, their first ever in the college football playoff, in their first game, what does that mean big picture here going forward for the Nittany Lions?
I think we all thought that they had an excellent chance to, including Las Vegas, thought they had an excellent chance to win this game. I think the fact that SMU, that their quarterback played so poorly and made so many big mistakes early in the game, I thought was sort of a multiplier of everything. The way turnovers, you throw it to the other team and that's a multiplier. So Penn State was able to stumble out of the blocks a little bit offensively and still control the game, still put points on the board. And then after the third interception, they put a drive together. They put a 75-yard drive together. And then with the lead, they ran the ball very effectively. This is the second game in a row that they ran the ball very effectively against a good opponent, which I think is the most encouraging thing from that game going forward.
Yeah, I think it's two of the big things that have not just gotten Penn State here to this point, but can drive them further in the playoff. And that's the defense, which came up big and made even bigger plays, but kept the pressure on a quarterback, like Mike mentioned, the entire time. And then secondly, the run game. And we mentioned the run game because Katron Allen and Nick Singleton appear to be healthy and maybe together for the first time or best time this entire season. And This is the right time. Okay. So the offensive line and those running backs together are the kind of foundation that I would think a national title type of team is made of. Everybody's got flaws, but this type of success to me can help alleviate those, overshadow those, make up for those. We saw it against an undermanned team already in SMU, and I think we're going to see the same thing against another undermanned opponent to some degree against Boise.
We're going to dive into the offensive line a lot more later on in the show. Questions, comments, concern, make sure to email BlueWhiteTailgatePodcast@gmail.com. For me, guys, I don't know when you thought this game was over. And, I have a tendency, no matter what type of sport I've been covering in my professional career, to always deem the game is over early based on something that happens. For me, the game was over 4th and 1 at the Penn State 19. Jennings has a wide open tight end at the goal line for a touchdown, and the ball is just lollygagged out there. I don't know if it was cold, it was anything, but for me, that's what said SMU was not ready to play on this level with this weather on this stage. No matter how some of their big donors look on their private planes, State College, looking all dapper, putting the fit on, that just said, hey, it's cold out and we're not exactly ready to play. Whether it was weather or just not being ready for this.
They got a lot of oil money. But that doesn't do you any good when you're in
do you guys agree with that?
20 degrees. Yeah.
Did you guys think SMU was not?
I think here are a couple of things about this quarterback. The best two defenses that they faced before they got to Penn State were probably Duke and Brigham Young, and he struggled against both of them, and they lost to Brigham Young. Duke, of course, Manny Diaz. We all know what he's capable of as a coordinator. But anyway, so as Frank, I think Frank mentioned this last week, he'd never played in front of a crowd half the size that he was dealing with last week. So I think those two things together, I think he was a little bit overwhelmed. We're kind of ripping this kid, and he had a good year, but I think those two things added together are sort of telling that it was really a tough spot for him. And again, you throw it to the other team, and it's a multiplier. You sort of have to throw the ball to get the lead. This is a little simplistic, but in general, you throw the ball to get the lead, you run the ball to protect the lead. Well, Penn State didn't have to throw the ball to get the lead because they returned interceptions. And so it was a lot of things. I thought the third interception, there was almost a reaction in the press box like, oh man, are you kidding me? It's just, I mean, that's when it was really, to me, that's when it was kind of over.
Yeah. I mean, SMU had to make big plays, and they did the opposite. They made them for Penn State. So there was no way they were coming back. There was people, it was 28-0 at halftime. So I guess I probably should have booked my Fiesta Bowl airline ticket at that point, right? I should have done that, but I didn't. Did you really?
On time. Okay. Correctly.
But I think it's maybe also kind of a work of a whole season that we're seeing here. I mean, the running game was supposed to be really good, but there's reasons why it wasn't the whole year. Okay, well, they've worked through it. They've worked through developing Tyler Warren that he doesn't have to dominate every game, but he can. Their defense and Abdul Carter have put in the type of effort, without the holding calls, doesn't matter. He's healthy. He's playing well. I mean, they've gotten themselves, I think, in maybe one of the best, even though the national storyline won't say it, I think they've gotten themselves in one of the best positions possible. They're 2 games away from playing for a national title, and they're going to be favored more easily than anyone in this game upcoming. They've worked themselves into a great position, whether the outside world sees it or not.
And think about, here's another thing. That Big Ten championship game, in retrospect, the performance in that game was kind of a positive. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
That's part of what you're talking about. It was a loss, but it was kind of a positive.
I think for their offensive line, their offensive line dominated Oregon in the run game. And I don't know if we had seen that. And I think they could have gained more from that experience alone, despite losing, than maybe anything. We'll see how this plays out, right? They have one more team they should beat, and then they're going to be put right into the third time this year against an opponent they may not be favored or very little in. It's going to be the third big game of the year. So, we'll see, but I think they're not trying to find answers in game number 15, right? They're not like looking for a healthy quarterback. They're not trying to figure out if they can get a good effort from the pass game. They're not, they're there.
I think they're still looking for that a little bit.
Okay, but I would like Drew Aller better than Georgia's backup quarterback and better than Notre Dame's quarterback at the moment, better than Boise State's quarterback. So I'm putting him pretty high up in the remaining teams.
There's a lot of things to when we talk about growth and getting to where they've been, just subtle things throughout the whole year with Drew Aller. West Virginia, I brought it up. I didn't really like his hotness towards one of the officials. But then I love the hotness towards the fans that was caught on camera at Wisconsin. And there's just a whole bunch of things. Him taking more control, like in the huddle, the fourth quarter against USC. And Frank, I'm right with you. There's a lot of things to like about his growth. And you nailed it a couple weeks ago when you said we think Drew Aller is going to come back. He's coming back. And that is just going to be a more mature Drew Aller for next year. And who knows what's on the horizon for Penn State. What we do know is in front of us, or even looking back a little bit, tons of guys could have been players of the game for Penn State against SMU. From the offensive line, for what they've been able to string together 2 straight games. The running backs are obviously having great games. Tyler Warren, Drew Aller. Defensively, Abdul Carter, you look at the stat sheet, not really doing anything on the stat sheet, but everybody sees him out there chasing around quarterbacks, chasing around guys in the backfield. Who are the players of the game for Penn State versus SMU?
Well, I'm going to start off with the linebackers, not just because of what they did in the interceptions and the returns, Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, but that's a position that we've been wondering about. And I think with Tony Rojas, it could be partly an injury issue that he's playing through. But the bottom line is they made big plays against SMU, and they're going to need to make big plays. They're going to need more than Kobe King being the ultra consistent guy in the middle of the field. They're going to need more than that. And at least we saw it, right? I mean, Dom DeLuca, I don't know if, his injury issue, how much that hurt him, but he was active and he played well. And that was maybe the biggest moment. Tony Rojas looked like a running back on it that he used to be. Looked like a running back on that return. I mean, so that's a bit. Those guys to me would be co-stars of the game. Clearly.
Yeah, I would agree with the linebacker group. I didn't think Tony Rojas is a little bit mistake prone sometimes, overruns plays, misses, and I didn't think I didn't see any of that. And I noticed that for whatever you think it's worth, the Pro Football Focus film study people graded him very highly in this game. So that may have been his best game. I'm going to say Kobe King for my guy, because I thought he just had an excellent, terrific game. He didn't make any mistakes. He was around the ball a lot, made a lot of plays. The linebackers are the story, but I'm going to go with the guy who did not have an interception.
Am I wrong to say when you put in Abdul Carter, put him as a linebacker because, he kind of plays that hybrid position anyway. Yeah. This was the most impactful game for a linebacker core at Penn State, positive-wise, since the 1987 national championship.
Oh, my goodness. 1987. Well, I thought right when I started covering the team, they had Posluszny and Sean Lee and Dan Connor. And I thought those guys were huge in a couple of big games. For example, that game where they beat Ohio State in 2005. I thought those guys were huge in that game. So, I can't remember enough detail to say for sure that, but that's one that comes to mind. And that threesome of linebackers, that core of linebackers, then all of whom, of course, played in the NFL, and a couple of them were, I would say, stars in the NFL. They come to mind, but yeah.
Well, I'm not going to touch that one because we're passing by LeVar Arrington, Brandon Short's group. Paul Posluszny, Sean Lee, Mike Mowdy, Navarro Bowman, they all kind of were there around the same time. And
continue there for a while. Yeah.
And again, I don't make that statement lightly. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it actually in the second half of the game. And I'm trying to come up with what game did LeVar and Brandon and Mac Morrison have such an outsized impact with the 2 interceptions return, a third interception, the Kobe King being constant, Abdul Carter chasing around. And I know I'm giving them like a fourth with Abdul Carter in there and that kind of a little bit outside. And so let's throw Courtney Brown in for LeVar. That Purdue game in 1999 definitely came to mind. The Ohio State game with Tim Shaw, Dan Connor, and Paul Posluszny and everything Puz did through that entire season. Michael Mahdi against Illinois and Gerald Hodges and everything they were. So I didn't make that statement, just in a vacuum. But the game they had, the impact that linebackers had, especially on stat sheet, that you're able to circle this, circle that, 14 points here, another interception, I just thought was like outsized and the most impactful game that easily readable since the 1987 national championship.
Especially, in terms of putting points on the board. They put points. Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah.
When you go to Paul Posluszny, I think he had, how many tackles did he have at Northwestern when they had?
I thought it was 22. I thought it was 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
But his performance in that Ohio State game in 2005 is just epic for what he did. He didn't return anything for touchdowns, but it was an epic performance against a tremendous opponent. When on the field after the game, you have people asking Joe Paterno, are you guys back? Which we understand. So whole different scenario to me, and so, yeah, I don't know if Navarro Bowman also iced he had a tremendous game. They played Indiana at the end of the 2008 season after they just had lost to Iowa. He returned an interception for a touchdown and had a tremendous game that day. So no, I can't think of another one where they had two.
Yeah.
But
And
point.
and also, and giving it to all three linebackers, the group of three. Navarro Bowman was really good, man. He would have been a Hall of Fame type pro if he had been reasonably healthy, I think.
Absolutely. And to be clear, I'm not saying this was the best performance. I'm just saying the most impactful performance.
Right.
Yeah. Impactful offensive line. You guys are both probably going to write about this, Mike. I know you're taking a deep dive with the offensive line coming up. Nolan Rucci, with what he's been able to do. Pro Football Focus. You talked about grades. They graded him the highest for his
highest offensive lineman in the first round of the playoffs. Yep.
Yeah. And he's a local kid from Lancaster, just across the river from Frank's area in York. His dad, Penn State connection, mom, All-American at Penn State. What he's been able to do coming off and gaining that position with injury. He always rotated in when everybody was healthy, but now as the full-time starter, and he even went off and came back in. What does his performance mean for Penn State going forward?
Well, if you remember the first 6 or so weeks of this season, James Franklin couldn't compliment Anthony Dunco enough. I mean, he just gushed about him as a redshirt freshman, and he was the guy who Rucci was competing with to start, and he lost that competition at the beginning of the season to Dunco, who seemed to be playing as well as any offensive lineman they have. And the other thing was Vega Ione, or however you pronounce his name, they were using him very creatively, moving him around and stuff like that. And then for a while they were without both of those guys. And now it feels like their offensive line is playing better than ever, which I think is a tribute a little bit to what Rucci has done, but also maybe a little bit to the fact that offensive lines have to have a little bit of chemistry. It has to be a 5-man unit that works well together. And maybe it took them some time to get that. And the other thing to bear in mind here about there's a lot of programs in the country that could not lose a kid like Dunco and replace him with a kid who was the kind of recruit that Nolan Rucci was, who was a 5-star recruit.
Yeah, I think it's and Andy Kudlnicki mentioned it a good bit today. It's the physicality too. It's that attitude. I think fans and media types have been asking James Franklin for about 7 years, when is his offensive line going to play like they've got an attitude, like they want to beat up the other team? And other than a few performances here and there, it's never really happened. And it seems like it's become more the norm and consistently happening now. And you mentioned Vega Iwane as being one of those guys. Sometimes you go over the edge a little bit, right, with the personal fouls. But I think overall, and then, Drew Shelton, who most people don't talk about, but I think he's coming back from a shoulder injury. He's quietly been really consistent and effective at left tackle. And I think them being able to hold it together, insert Rucci, but with that attitude. I think it's that they're feeling it. They felt it against Oregon. And I think that's the key going forward, not just protecting Drew Aller, but moving people in the run game. And it seems like
a really good point. If you think about Olu Fashanu, who was the 10th pick in the draft, I mean, he was a great player, but he was way better as a pass blocker than as a run blocker. He wasn't really that guy who was going to knock people on their ass and all that. So, yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
Mike, you say knocking people on their ass. Penn State's D-line. Abdul Carter doesn't really knock people on his ass because he's so fast that he's getting around everybody.
Yeah, right.
But we had, we talked about it last week that the defensive line was going to get at it. I believe the soundbite played was balls to the wall. They did that. Everybody that came in the last game, they were able to play hard, play fast. And one of the guys that stood out to me for the limited reps that he gets, Keziah Izzard, there was that one play where he kept Jennings.
He was active. Yeah, I agree. He was really active.
It was almost like a boxing one where he was playing as a defensive end to keep Jennings from evading him to get outside. And it was it felt like a 14-second quarterback scramble where Jennings kept going back and back and back. And I'm like, now this is an unsung hero to my God, because he gets no.
I think Franklin mentioned that, or maybe it was Tom Allen. Somebody mentioned that how good a job he did of maintaining that edge against that quarterback. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Zane Durant, and Zane gets a lot of the pub up front, but that play by Keziah Izzard just like summed it up. And there's moments for me, and I don't know how you guys feel, where, things coming together. Like, that's a moment for me where it says things are gelling for Penn State because it's in a big game, a game with a lot of eyeballs. It's very easily for a player to lose focus of an assignment, chase the ball, and then allows the big play for the opposing team. Keziah Izzard put all team ambition, all team goals ahead of personal ambition. Yay or nay?
Yeah, I get that. And what the opening series, I thought he was going to take Deion Barnes' head off. He was pretty animated, and he was pretty fired up, which I say it in a good way, is that, I mean, he's not the guy that gets a lot of attention, but he's been pretty steady through his career as a top backup, started some more early on. He's important. He's the type of guy that is going to make a difference as to whether they move. To me, I mean, in a lot of ways, maybe whether they move on or not in the next game or two, because you're going to need breathers. You're going to need more than your starters. And if you're getting that type of energized effort from that big guy, that's huge. If not this coming game, certainly the next one.
One thing that we just equated to the NFL. One thing we always say about the Eagles is how good they are in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Well, Penn State maybe is headed in that direction a little bit. Certainly, they look more that way now than they have for a long time, I think.
And hey, in this era of NIL, building teams like the NFL, everybody's getting GMs now, stacking deep talent, right?
Yeah, I wonder what's happening on that front, by the way. A GM for Penn State, which James mentioned at the beginning of the season. Yeah. I don't know.
Interesting. We're not going there yet. We got Boise State ahead of us, right?
Boise, to hear. Say it. Boise State.
Boise State, a reunion with Tracy Collins. I think Boise State gets more out of that arrangement than Penn State in terms of insight.
That's the headline of the bowl game. A reunion with Stacy Collins.
I don't know if that's the headline, but I think, people I saw printed in a couple places right now with that reunion. Tracy could definitely he was great to deal with from the media side of things. When we got a chance to talk to him with special teams, I always thought he was great to deal with. So glad to see him back in a big bowl game. We always talked about this year, who's the most feared guy that Penn State has to worry about. Without question, Ashton Jeanty, phenomenal running back for Boise State, number 2 Heisman vote getter. A lot of people had him as their top one. He even said he should have won the Heisman this year. What does Penn State have to do to stop him? Obviously, because Izzard's going to play outside factor in that.
Well, they got a gang tackle. I think they got to pursue and gang tackle. You can't. And we've seen it. If you're on point, there's more than one guy has to be meeting him in the hole before he gets through the line of scrimmage. I mean, that's because once he gets through it, then it becomes a real issue. And then you're putting yourself at huge pressure to try to bring him down one-on-one. So I'll be interested in Kobe King and the pursuit and the guys we just mentioned. I mean, Izzard, Zane Durant, what can they do to him around the line of scrimmage? To me, that's the key.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think win up front is the best thing, the best thing about dealing with a guy like that. One thing to keep in mind with a guy like him, it's kind of like a basketball player who has the ball all the time and is taking all the shots, like James Harden. It's kind of like that. He has unbelievable numbers, but he's also an outsized proportion of everything they do offensively. So, it's like you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him, as they say. Well, it's a matter of containing him. And if he gets into the open space, then it's going to be a lot like the receiver from Oregon who was running free in the open space a couple weeks ago. It's going to be a lot like that. So winning up front is really, really critical.
Jeanty had 192 yards against Oregon.
Yeah. Against Oregon, yeah.
Was that a game that Penn State is playing over and over again to see what Oregon did against Boise State, or because it happened so long ago and Oregon, I mean, they struggled against Idaho at that point. Is that game just so far in the past and Oregon's such a different team does Penn State gain anything from going into a heavy film study, or are you going more at UNLV where he had 209, but Boise State gave up 200 yards rushing to UNLV?
I mean, to me, I think you look at all of it.
Go ahead, Frank.
I think you look at all of it. I mean, I don't know if you focus solely on that because, one, it is so long ago, and Oregon is not. I mean, look at what Penn State did to them on the ground. So I think you look at, maybe you compare a little bit as to what teams tried to do. I don't know. None of it much work, but I think I think James Franklin and Tom Allen have an idea, regardless of what others did, what they want to do. I mean, I think they have the key. And I mean, their linebackers, like we just spent a lot of time talking about, are going to have to step up. And their safety play. I mean, Jalen Reed should be huge in this game as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Zakee Wheatley. And I think they know what they want to do. It's just against a guy that's elite like this, it's doing it and making sure that everybody else doesn't go outside their boxes, right? I mean, because there is other people on the team, and you see this where a guy that doesn't have big numbers, everybody's focusing on Genty, and all of a sudden they bootleg out and they throw it to the tight end and it has 8 catches all year, and all of a sudden you have, you got some issues here. But I think they know. I mean, we've seen Penn State succeed in these circumstances before, but I think they need to do it early. I mean, I think you're going to get a taste for this early on as to their success and how these guys are going to handle him. Because if they can,
you know what Boise State's doing, they're giving him the ball, man. There aren't many running backs anymore the way football is played now that get the number of touches that this guy gets. I mean, this is Archie Griffin, Billy Sims, that kind of stuff. And he's getting the rock. There's no doubt about that. But I think Penn State's defense will be the best defense that Boise State has seen. Right?
Good point. Yes. And the problem with, and Boise State played Oregon really well, but they've not played a diet of the same type of opponents like Penn State. So,
and Oregon was clearly not the same team in early September that they became. Yeah.
They were not. And as much as SMU had to kind of adjust on the fly to the talent situation and the weather. I mean, but Boise's going to they're not going to understand it until they hit the field, what it's like going up against a team like Penn State, because they're not their fault. They're in the group of 5. They're in the Western Athletic Conference. They're not playing the same types of teams. They have not seen Abdul Carter in live action and will not know, tackles will not know what that's like until they experience it. And he doesn't have crazy numbers, so I think people are still underplaying Abdul Carter and how difficult it is to stop him. I mean, you saw with that tackle against SMU. I mean, he basically about gave up halfway through the game. But
and if they double him, there's a price to be paid for that. If they double him or play too much attention to Carter, there's obviously a price to be paid for that. Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who's covered Ohio State in the past and is a Buckeye fan text me and say, "Where's the number 11 been for Penn State all year long?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" Well, he doesn't have great numbers. I'm like, well, he doesn't have great numbers because he's held a lot, and 2, he influences it and they spread him. He influences the game in such a different way of quick releases. And also they move him around so many times where he back off the line of scrimmage. That's why when he's told to do one singular thing, he does it really, really well.
I think defensive linemen, more than any other position group, their stats are deceptive. You can't go by tackle numbers for defensive linemen. And I find that there's so many times when I'm covering a Penn State game and I think this guy's been around the ball all day. This guy had a great game. And I'll look at the stat book afterwards and he has 2 tackles or something. It's amazing how often that happens. Or kind of the other way around. That guy had 9 tackles. I didn't really notice him that much. It just feels to me like those numbers are really deceptive. And also Penn State plays a lot of people. That's another thing that cuts down on individual numbers for defensive guys.
Frank, you were very high on this secondary to begin with, and then Penn State loses Kevin Winston Jr. Did you think when Penn State lost Kevin Winston, I know we talked about what would have to happen to replace him to get where Penn State wants to go, with Zion Tracy and Zakee Wheatley, I think they've gotten better every single week. Yes, they had the block in the back against Illinois that wiped an interception return off, and we're like, that will never happen again. Since that moment, have you seen them getting better every single week? And again, getting back to the original question, did you think Penn State's secondary would be where it's at right now without Kevin Winston Jr.?
I think it could be where it's at now. I think with him, we're talking another level that would have made maybe a difference, the biggest difference in the two biggest games. Okay, because I think they're good enough and these guys have played well enough that I'm not sure you notice it a whole lot in most of their other games. Yeah. But in those two games, that missing that elite presence, I think it showed because because the rest of the unit was under such stress. And I think, until they play another passing team, I don't know if we're going to get a full judge of this. Yeah, I think they've done pretty well overall. I think their run support obviously is going to be first and foremost, or their Genty support will be first and foremost this coming week. So I think they've done a nice job overall. I don't see any, there's nobody for me to pick on. Like a lot of times it's easy to do that in the secondary by the end of the season. And I don't think there really is anyone per se. But I think they still are going to have a test or two ahead where they're going to be looked at.
If they're going to win the whole thing, I think what Frank is suggesting here is exactly correct. If they're going to win the whole thing, they're going to have to show that they can do things in the vertical passing game on offense and defense that they have not quite shown yet against good competition. That's the next tier, I think, for them. If they're going to get past, we all
are they the lockdown best defensive back group I've seen at Penn State, or maybe up to what we thought? I wouldn't say that, because you can, I guess, no matter what, how good Oregon is, they just weren't able to contend with them very well. I mean, that's just simply put. So they may get another shot. We'll see. But, jury's still out a little bit on that until they play.
Who knows? If we're talking about, in Winston, we're talking about a guy who was probably like an All-American caliber safety. So sure, he would have made a difference. Yeah.
Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin was very adamant during the opening week of the college football playoff. Joel Klatt from Fox's color analyst on their Fox Big Noon kickoff. Well, Joel, first he did take a shot at Penn State going, shocking, you can't have a whiteout at noon. Note to Joel, it still wasn't the same amount of energy that's there for a night game. It was also pretty cold out. To the college football playoff, Joel also said to Lane Kiffin, like, hey, you got to cool it. These are all hypothetical matchups. What did you guys think about the first round of the college football playoff? Did the committee get it right in your mind with the way the blowouts worked? I still don't have a problem with who the committee put in. I might have problems with the seed lines based on how they seeded some things on these stupid conference champions get a bye.
And that wasn't the committee. That was the hand they were dealt.
Yeah. I still think they should have artificially adjusted the playoff. That's just my view. So what do you guys think about the college football playoff after its first volume, we'll say, of the 12-team playoff?
Something that I saw something the other day where the average margin of victory in college football playoff games with the 4-team format was something like, let's say, 18.6 points per game. The average margin of victory last weekend was something like 19.2 or something. And those games weren't on anybody's home field under the 4-team format, right? They tripled the size of the field. What do you think is going to happen in the first round? I thought that was an absurd argument, and then to hear a guy that I respect like Herb Street just go nuts about the Notre Dame Indiana game, like Indiana was Dartmouth or something. I mean, over the top.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no problem with it. I mean, the only problem I guess I would have is like what you mentioned, Andrew, is the seating. Like to me, in this type of a format, why, and it's not to pick on Boise, but why are they getting a third seed and a bye? And I think when you look at who they are and what they are, they should be playing in the first round. And I think if they can adjust the conference championship situation, I think it'll help to some degree. Now, it's nothing about the blowouts per se. I just don't, the feel of the bracket is not quite where I think it should be. That's all.
And the reason why, just to be clear, the reason why Boise is up in these top 4 seeds is because nobody in the ACC distinguished themselves enough to be ranked ahead of Boise. And that's kind of is how it was. So it's a structure thing more than a judgment thing.
But adjust it because Boise shouldn't be seated ahead of Penn State, for example, to start the tournament. They just shouldn't. They're not. They're
okay. So what's your rule for next year?
Well, then you got to adjust what they're doing with conference championship games.
Oh, make it, we're seeding them 1 through 12.
I like that. Yeah. Somehow, some way, try to seed them honestly 1 through 12.
Yeah, because a lot of people like Clapp said, wait a minute, Ohio State beat Penn State at Penn State, and now Penn State's getting an easier path. So in a way, he's disrespecting what SMU did, what Boise State did. Easy,
Herb Street, the problem is yes, that happened, or Joel Clapp. Yes, that happened, but then Ohio State got themselves into the position they are because they lost a game they should not have lost. And what did Penn State do? Penn State did not have a bad loss. They did not lose a game to a team that was 7-5 or whatever it was. So
all these teams that are complaining lost to Vanderbilt, lost to Kentucky, got blown out by Oklahoma, which had one Power 4 win after September. Stop.
I agree with everything you guys are saying. I agree with everything you guys are saying. That's why we're friends. That's why we're on a podcast.
Well, maybe we ought to get a little more hot. Good for the show to
through the spring. That would be amazing. Game, just in case our schedules conflict for next Monday, right before the game. How do you guys see this game playing out against Boise State? Because apparently, according to the Boise State writers, Penn State has no speed. They're slow as molasses.
No speed.
Yeah, I saw that.
Have you seen this?
I saw one guy doing this. One guy. Is that multiple people saying this?
Do they mean on offense?
There were 2 on the screen, and they were both agreeing. So,
well, I think the problem is this: weather isn't going to be an element in Arizona.
Slippery glass.
What's that?
Slippery glass, just like at the Super Bowl a couple years ago.
Yeah, well, I guess slippery grass could be an issue, but you would think that would help Penn State because I think they do have a good bit of speed. And I think a lot of people, even nationally, acknowledge that their defense and their secondary can run, but also Nick Singleton and some of their offensive guys can run. I mean, Katron Allen isn't that speed, but when he's knocking through people, his burst can turn a 15-yard run into a 28-yard run, which is important. And Nick can go the distance. So I think the speed thing, I don't understand it, but hey.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I think maybe because of what Penn State gets from the wide receiver position.
I think that's the focus.
That maybe is what leads somebody to believe that. Yeah.
And I think that is irresponsible to say Penn State doesn't have speed based on wide receivers not hitting a lot of vertical routes and just focusing on one position groups. Because the guys in the secondary can run. Abdul Carter could run. Tony Rojas could run.
It's all relevant because while Tyler Warren does not look like a speedster, he's above average fast for his size and position. Yeah. And while Drew Aller is not a threat to take it 70 yards, look at how much better he is with his mobility and running ability. So speed is just, eye of the beholder here, I guess. But
A little bit. Yep. A little bit.
Let's see, 10.5-point favorite as a couple hours ago. I haven't looked to see if it's changed. How do you guys see this game playing out?
bet the Nittany Lions, cover the spread. I'm going to go like 30-13 type of score that they just keep Boise. Maybe they tussle around with them early, but they keep them at arm's length. Too much speed and actually too much speed and talent overall and depth.
Yeah, my usual tendency is to try and talk myself into the games being close, but in this, I feel this feels the opposite to me. I'm going to say 38-14. Ooh. Yeah, I think I like Penn State pretty big in this spot. I'm risking having egg on the face, but not hardly the first time that's happened.
I was at Penn State 28-20 for 3-4 days. I was like Penn State 28-20. I think Boise State's going to be able to grind out some run game, slow Penn State down, shorten the game type of event.
Yeah.
And then I woke up yesterday on Christmas Day and I said, you know what? I think Penn State 31-17, they're going to cover the spread. So I'm going 31-17, Nittany Lions. I think Genty hasn't been able to see a defense as good as Penn State's all year long, including Oregon. And I think the guys up front, Izzer, Zane Durant, and Kobe King, with what he's been able to do and just be Mr. Consistency, I think Kobe King might have his best game of the year. I really do. And Torero is getting better. So that's how I see it. Joe, you guys flying out to warm weather. I'm sticking this one out in Pennsylvania. I anticipate to see you guys in Miami Gardens. Is that what it is? Is that where the Orange Bowl's at? Miami Gardens?
I think that's what it's called. Yeah, that's right. Very good.
So book your flight, avoid the rush, and as always, hate Michigan early for next year. No, we're only kidding at that. We'll always respect the Michigan Wolverines. So, all right, guys, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just want to rip one of our takes, reach on out to us at BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast at gmail.com. For Mike, Frank, I'm Andrew Clista. Thanks for listening. Have a happy holiday season.
Peace out.